Okay, good enough. So, that might make you wonder, what is the point, okay? What do skateboards have to do with engines? Well, it's simple, really. They both have bearings. Okay, now before you leave, I know, I'm pretty punny here, okay? It happens, but look, the difference between a skateboard bearing and an engine bearing is pretty much how it works. In a skateboard, you've got little ball bearings inside of a race, and then it's sealed sometimes with grease, and it basically just spins on those little balls. So I obviously can't use skateboard bearings inside of an engine, so what will we use in its place? Well, a lot of things like this, which would be a connecting rod, would have what's called a rod bearing inside here. Or in the case of the crankshaft, you would have what's called a main bearing. Now, these bearings are a little bit more complicated than your typical skateboard bearings because these are designed to have a thin film of oil ride on the inside of this. So today what we're going to be doing is figuring out just what the size of that film of oil is going to be by measuring all these clearances. So it's going to get a little nerdy. But before we can do all that, I got to clean this whole thing out yet again. Okay, so I gotta show you guys something. This is the first time this has ever happened to me, but I have one of the brushes that I use for clearing out and chasing these holes break off inside there. Yeah, so I don't know if you can see that in there, but that is literally broke off inside there. So this should be fun. Oh, come on, you are almost there. Oh my God, what a pain in the ass. Bigger problem is gonna be all these little tiny shards. Oh, thank God. What a nightmare. You know, it's always the smallest things that make the biggest setbacks when it comes to this thing. All right, so now that fiasco is taken care of, let's get the main bearings put in. So here's the cool thing about engine bearings. You get two ways to install them. One way, which is the correct way, where you don't block the hole, and another way where you get to rebuild your engine for free. Yeah. But I'll tell you, anytime you gotta do anything with torque angle, it's always nice having a nice digital wrench, because it makes it a lot easier when you're trying to do this stuff. Come on, baby. Especially something like that, you gotta get 51 degrees. That's so weird. Okay, so this is the part where a lot of people are probably gonna wanna click off and go away because we're about to get really nerdy here. So if you are one of those people, just hang with me, okay? What we're doing now, I'm gonna simplify this as best I can. What we're gonna be doing is taking a micrometer or caliper and measuring the size of our journals here on this crankshaft. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna take this tool, once we have that zeroed out, and we're gonna zero out this tool, which is a fancy tool. It's called a dial bore gauge. And basically this will be able to tell us exactly where we are inside the engine, and it will tell us exactly what our clearances are. So there's no guesswork, no Plastigauge, none of the cheap stuff. This is the legit way that you would do it if you were actually building an engine, which, go figure, that's what we're doing. Okay, so don't let these numbers scare you. We don't really care what those numbers say because this caliper may not be the exact same as the one that they used at the machine shop. All we're concerned with is the distance inside here. So this part we're just gonna do by feel. We're gonna take the caliper and we're gonna try to gauge it on here as best as we can. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm just taking the caliper and we're gently gliding it to make sure it can go all the way through. It should just barely drag a little bit in there, but it should be able to go all the way. And we're gonna check it at several points just to make sure that it's even on all sides. So now that I have it where I want it, I'm just gonna lock it in place. So now this is not gonna change, and we're gonna use this to zero out the dial bore gauge. Okay, so are you still with me? Okay, good. If you're still here, then great, we'll keep going. If not, then I'm just sitting in my garage talking to myself, and that's okay too. So this part here could be a little bit tricky because this thing likes to move all over the place, but you're just trying to balance it in there and find the dead 0 point, and you gotta kind of wiggle it around. Boy, this thing can be frustrating sometimes, I tell you what. Okay, so you can see it comes to a point, it stops and it starts to fall. You just wanna find that 0 point and then dial the gauge into that. So now you can see it comes up to a stop point, we're at 0, and then it'll want to go back down. So we are zeroed out now. Perfect. So then all we do is we just lock this thing in, and then we should have ourselves a set gauge. Okay, well, I would say that's pretty much 0, so it's a lot easier when you can actually read the gauge, but yeah, let's go ahead and check our clearances and see where we're at. Uh-oh. Okay, so when it comes to oil clearance, there's a very simple formula for figuring this out. All you have to do is figure out what the diameter of your journals are. So in my case, on my crankshaft, the main bearing journals are 2.549 inches. So essentially, for every inch there is of journal diameter, you'll add 1 thousandths worth of oil clearance. So in my case, that would equal about 25 thousandths worth of oil clearance, or you could round up to 26, and that should get me somewhere in the ballpark. Now, I could obviously go a little bit tighter, or I could go a little bit more open if I want to. All this is going to do is determine what weight oil I'm going to be using. So it really depends on the application, but in my case, my goal is about 25 thousandths. Okay, so when I'm checking this, I'm just kind of running it in here very gently just to see what I can get for a number. And the number that I read here is going to tell me what my clearance is. Well, now that's just interesting. Now what I'm seeing here is it looks like about maybe 1.5, so basically 15 thousandths. So that's close to what I want, but that's not exactly what I want. So I'm gonna go check the rest of these bearings and see what we get. Okay, so I just got done checking all of these bearings, and what I found was from the very first one back, we had a little bit of variance, which is normal, that's gonna happen. But the tightest one was the number 1 bearing versus the back one, and number 5 was the loosest. So my thought is to get these within spec is I'm gonna basically swap them. And hopefully that'll make a difference. Hopefully the variance is in the bearing and not the actual block, but we'll have to do this and find out. So just for reference, that clip you just saw was about 30 minutes. That should give you a little bit of an idea how long this stuff takes. But let's go find out exactly what we got on here using the exact same measurements we had before and see if we get any change in our measurements. So it looks like that did open it up just a little bit. I'm looking at like a little bit over 15 thousandths now. Okay, let's see what we get in the back. Okay, let's see if we get anything any tighter back here. So that did tighten it up just a little bit. We're looking at looks like 15, maybe 16 thousandths in the rear. It's a little on the tight side, but not bad. I just noticed something. I think I might have put the main caps in wrong. Ah, boy. So I just realized I made a big boo-boo, and I put the main caps in wrong. For whatever reason, I don't know why in my brain, I flipped around 2, 3, and 4. They need to be flipped the other way around. So if you look right here, this is the tang that I'm talking about. Basically, I had them all facing forward and they need to be facing to the rear. I don't know how I do that. So I'm gonna end up taking all these back out, and I think what I'm gonna end up doing is just putting the crank in dry, and then we'll get a Plastigauge and see if the measurements are even close. If not, I'll take it out, redo XYZ until we get a good result. Otherwise, I'm gonna have to get new main caps and find ones that fit. So yeah, mistakes were made. So one thing to keep in mind when we're checking Plastigauge on these crankshafts, we want to make sure that they're going in completely dry and that they're all completely clean, because if they're not, that's going to take up space within the clearances and we'll get a bad reading. Now this is obviously not going to be the most accurate reading. Usually Plastigauge is at least 5 thousandths off, but we'll see what we end up with. Okay, so that was a lot of work, but I'm glad I did it because now I know for a fact that my measurements were accurate. The bearings are too tight because even using the Plastigauge, which is not super reliable way to do it, even that is showing that they're just way too tight. So I'm definitely gonna have to get some new bearings, but let me show you the results. Okay, so when you're looking at this mark, this is the Plastigauge spread over the bearing. Now, when we're looking on the Plastigauge, we're looking at these little markers here. So when we look at these markers, we're basically gonna take it and eye it up alongside this until we find the one that it matches. Now you can see here that it spreads even past what would be considered the 1,000th mark. So this thing is obviously way too tight because that's just too much. So luckily I went down to my local parts store and they actually had a set. The only problem is the packaging leaves a little something to be desired, but hopefully these things will work out. Okay, so the results are not great. Clevite was not much better than King. They were actually tighter in most of the bearings, especially the thrust bearing. The thrust bearing was coming in at around 0.008 of an inch, which is literally the limit. So if you take into account my error in actually measuring properly, yeah, it's definitely too tight. So I have to get another set of bearings, and this poses a problem. So the real issue is finding undersized bearings with extra clearance. There are a few companies that make them. King is one of them. The problem is they are sold out everywhere. I mean, it's just out. You can't get them. They're all on back ordered until like May, and it's January right now. I can't wait 4 months to get this done. So I did some scouring. I started looking over the internet. I was looking for little performance shops that I could find in all the different states, anywhere I could find one. And I happened to find one out in North Carolina. It's called Tick Performance. Now, they have a good website, and when I went there, I thought, maybe it's like fake or whatever, so I called them up, talked to the guy, Jeff. Huge shout out to you, Jeff. I do appreciate you. You're probably not seeing this, but if you did, thank you. They happen to have a couple sitting on the shelf, and they sent them out for me. So, you know, I paid for them, but they're gonna be here probably within a week or so. So I'm gonna get the right size bearings, but let me tell you, it is so stressful when you're scouring the internet for stuff and you just can't find it. But if you dig long enough, you'll probably find it. But I guess now what we need to do is go ahead and start working on the rod bearings. Hopefully these will be a little bit better. Okay, so I just got back from the machine shop and I got a box full of connecting rods. So we ended up having to send them in to get them resized because we ended up upgrading the hardware on these things. Usually whenever you change out connecting rods, you always want to put in new bolts. Well, ARPs are about $20 more than the stock ones, so we figured why not? It's a good thing we did because when we went there, we found out that, about 6 out of 8 of our connecting rods were bad. So I ended up replacing with a set that I got off eBay for about $70. It turned out to be a pretty good deal because they actually ended up being brand new connecting rods. So it was the craziest deal I've ever gotten. And we had the machine shop push in the new pins because that is a pain in the butt if you've ever had to do it. And I just assumed pay him. I think it was like $90 to have him push the pins, and I think I paid another $90 to have him check the rods. So $180, we were out the door. So it was a pretty good deal. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna take these connecting rods and we're gonna figure out our bearing clearances. So let's do it. Okay, so this is a connecting rod vise. It's a very simple tool. They're a little bit pricey, and I've gotten away with just using a vise and a couple blocks of wood. But I'll tell you, after using one of these, it makes it so much nicer to do. All you got to do is set it up inside your vise. I'm using a rag just to protect it, and then just put it in there and you're good to go. This thing just makes it a lot easier. Okay, so what we're doing is we're gonna put it in the vise right at the midpoint, so that way it keeps it from separating and twisting potentially. So we're just gonna set it in there just like that and tighten it down just enough to hold it. That way it's not gonna be able to twist one way or another, and then we'll just remove these bolts. So all we're gonna do is we're gonna break these things loose. Oh, I guess they were they were already loose. I guess I should have checked that. I don't know why I expected these things to be tight already, but they weren't. I was able to just do it by hand. So anyway, we're just gonna go ahead and install the bearings on these things, and then we'll go ahead and check what our clearances are. It's very similar to doing the crankshaft. So here's a cool little trick. If you got a broken brake cleaner, you just take your rag, dap it on top, and then bam, now you got yourself a wet rag. Okay, so I'm just cleaning this up real good, and then we're gonna spray it off with some compressed air. So now what I got here inside this box is what's called a bolt stretch gauge. Now essentially what this thing is going to do is going to measure the stretch of the bolts, because believe it or not, these bolts act as if they're springs. The first time I heard that, it blew my mind. But these bolts literally stretch and create spring tension. It's pretty crazy how they work. But anyway, we're going to measure that using one of these. Okay, so the way this gauge works is pretty simple. We're just going to set it onto the bolt because it's got a little bevel in there. And then once we get the point where it's 0, we're going to 0 this gauge out. So then whenever we go to torque this thing, we should get a change in that number. And then we'll just lock this sucker down and we should be good. So yeah, and we're just going to have to rinse and repeat this like 16 times. Fun. Okay, so ARP says that if we were going to do this by the foot-pound method, it would be 40 foot-pounds. You do it like 3 times. What we're going to do instead is I'm going to do 30 foot-pounds, and we're going to measure the stretch, and then we're just going to increase by 5 foot-pounds until we get the stretch that we want. And then we'll go ahead and check our clearances. Okay, so first I'm just gonna get these things like hand tight. Okay, there's 40. So at 40 foot-pounds, we're about 5/1000ths of an inch of stretch short. So I'm gonna up the foot-pounds by 5, so we'll go to 45 foot-pounds and see what we get. Oop, moving the thingy. So we're almost there. So let's try 50 foot-pounds and see what we get. There we go, 50. Well, it only took about 10 foot-pounds more than what they recommended, but we got the number. Okay, so now that I got the results for one, I'm gonna have to do the same thing for the other side. So I have to zero out the gauge, get the reading on that, make sure it's torqued, and then once it's torqued, we'll then be able to take our measurements of this bearing and figure out what size we got. It's pretty much the same process as doing the main bearings. So yeah, let's do it. Okay, there we go. So that's nice and loose. So now we'll go ahead and zero this thing out. Okay, it's all nice and zeroed out. Let's go ahead and torque it down. So 40 got us almost there, so we'll try 45 this time. Okay, so 45 got us pretty much right on the number, so it is interesting how the two different sides can have two totally different results. So that's why it is important to use one of these gauges. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna measure the rod journal on here with a caliper, and then we'll dial in our dial bore gauge. All right, we'll lock that in. This is probably one of the worst parts of doing this. Oh my God. Okay, I finally got it. Jeez, that thing is a pain. Okay, that's not bad. I'm getting between 15 and 20 thousandths. I mean, technically that's not the number we want. We want 21 thousandths, but technically according to the GM numbers, we want to get between 9 and 25 thousandths. So we're right in the middle of that spec, maybe a little bit more towards the big end, which is good. That's what we want. So what I need to do now is go ahead and check the other 7 connecting rods and see where we're at. So that went relatively well, except for this one connecting rod. For whatever reason, this connecting rod, I was reading a measurement of about 10 thousandths, but what's really weird is when I check the off angles to see what the sides are, one side is actually negative clearance, and then the other one has like 40 thousandths. So something is really wrong either with the bearing or it could be the housing of the connecting rod. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna test out some clavite bearings because I just happen to have some. We'll see if we get a different reading or not, and then yeah, otherwise I may need a new connecting rod. So as to be expected, the clavite bearings were a lot tighter than the king bearings, which they were still both wrong, but the clavites almost read 0. It was like 5 thousandths worth of clearance, but they were both completely out of round, especially when you went at an angle. One spot, it would sit at about, it was like negative clearance, and then the other side would be about 40 thousandths. So that just means that this whole thing's just completely out of round. So I am gonna have to replace one of the connecting rods, but that's why we do these measurements, because otherwise we wouldn't find it and we'd put it all together and be sad because we'd have to do it all over again. So luckily this is the only bad connecting rod that we have. The rest of them looked pretty good. They were about 15 to 19. It's okay, it's screwed up, it's fine. They were about 15 to 19 thousandths worth of clearance in all of them. So overall I'd have to say we're looking pretty good. If this was a performance build, I'd probably get better bearings, but this is an OEM rebuild. We're well within the specs, so we're gonna run these the way they are. I just gotta get a new connecting rod. But real quick, I wanted to go through some of the comments from a previous video because I'm horrible at responding to comments, so I figured, hey, let's just read a couple. So first off, I wanna say thanks to everybody that's been commenting on all the videos throughout the years and everybody that's been showing up time and time again. I do see all of your comments, like I do see them. The problem is they all get buried amongst a whole bunch of comments from older videos, or a lot of times it's a bunch of trolls. So what I thought I'd do is I'd go through here and read some comments from the most recent video, because most likely it's you guys that are putting them in there and not just randos that are popping in from 3 years ago. Nice work. You rarely see big engines here in Finland. Wow, I'm surprised it made it all the way out there, that you guys actually saw this. That's pretty cool. My 90s BMW got a straight 6 3.5 liter. That's a pretty decent sized six cylinder right there. But it's also the biggest one I've done so far. That's pretty impressive. I mean, that just goes to show sometimes you just got to work with what you got. Been following you guys for a long time. Glad to see you're still making videos. Don't know why, but the notifications aren't working for me, telling me to put out new videos. So sometimes that can happen if maybe you watch videos that aren't related to car stuff, or maybe I've put out videos and they just didn't do well and stuff. So sometimes YouTube just won't put it out. But also, I need to upload a little bit more, but hey, what do you know? Quite a good time to see this though. Just got done getting my LS and the Z31, so I'll pull it back out and paint it now that the mock-up is all done. Well, hey, if you got the time to do it, it definitely comes out pretty nice if you paint them. Another great video, man. I was laughing hard at the finger snap. I'm glad you liked that because I was just trying something new and I figured, you know, not everything goes according to plan, so it's kind of nice to show that every now and again that things aren't always as easy as they seem. Freaking Hamster says, another banger. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Those time-lapse pans are so slick. Well done. I appreciate it. I just started doing those because I got some new equipment I wanted to try out, but I'm glad you guys are liking them because I've seen a lot of positive feedback, so I'm going to continue to do it. What kind of rotating rig are you using on those time-lapses? They looked real nice. So yeah, it's just a basic slider I got. It's right over here on the tripod, but I mean, it works pretty well. It takes a little bit getting used to it. It's a little bit finicky to set up, but once it's set up, it works pretty good, and I'm having a lot of fun just kind of trying new things with it. So yeah, I mean, I could probably put a link somewhere if you want to take a look at that, you know, see if it helps you out. But yeah, I just wanted you guys to know that I do see your comments. It's just a lot of times I avoid going into the comments because it's a lot of negativity that I get from a lot of my older videos. And so I try to just not read that stuff because it just, sometimes you could be having a good day and then you just read a comment and it's just like, holy crap. Okay, I mean, it's to be expected being on YouTube, but sometimes I'm just like, please, God, please, no. So yeah, so sometimes if I want to stay in a good mood, I don't read comments. But yeah, I figured I'd try this out maybe at the end of the video and just see, you know, just a little bit more interaction with y'all. Let you know that I do care, and I appreciate the fact that you guys watch this stuff. But yeah, I'm going to get headed out. I hope y'all have a great day, and I'll be sure to see you in the next one. Bye! Oh my God. I just filmed this like 3 times and I forgot to hit record. Anyway. Fuck. Every time. Good Lord. I have run into a problem. I do not have a 3/4 adapter. Shit. Why does it keep thinking that's a person? That's so weird. It's been like 5 days of me stressing about this. I know it seems like this is all the same day. I know I'm ruining the YouTube magic here, but yeah, it's not. It's been like 5 days. I've just been like reusing this shirt to make it all look consistent. Like it's actually freezing out, but you know, I just take my sweater off to make it look like it's all the same day. So yeah, there's a little BTS for you.